Hello, my name is Martin Edwards. I'm the editor of the new CWA anthology, Vintage Crime. And in this panel, I'm joined by Andrew Taylor, Kate Ellis, and Dee Parkin. And I'd like to ask them each to introduce themselves briefly before we get underway. Kate, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
I'm the author of the Wesley Peterson crime series, as well as the Joe Plantagenet crime series and the Albert Lincoln trilogy set just after the First World War. I combine history with modern day mystery.
Andrew.
Hello, I'm Andrew Taylor. I've written about 45 crime novels of one sort or another in various sort of subgenres, but at present I'm in the 17th century. I'm writing a series set in Restoration England, which began with the Ashes of London.
And Dee?
Hi, I'm secretary of the Crime Writers Association, which means that I liaise with our members and also with external bodies, with the dagger judges, with all kinds of people. So it's a very nice job for me, and I enjoy working with writers very much. I'm also an editor in my spare time, which I also love. I don't write crime fiction myself, but I'm an avid reader.
Thanks. Now, as I say, I've edited this new anthology just published by Flametree called Vintage Crime, and we'll be talking about that during the course of this conversation. As for myself, I'm a crime novelist. I've published 19 crime novels. The majority of them are contemporary. I've got a series set in the Lake District Mysteries, and also a series set in Liverpool. But more recently, I've written a couple of books set in 1930. One of them is called Gallows Court, and most recently that's been followed by a book called Mortmain Hall. I'm also the editor of a number of anthologies, both in the British Library Crime Classics series and for the CWA. I've been editing the CWA anthology for over 20 years, and I'm delighted that we have now got this new publication out on the bookshelves. Now, we thought we'd cover a number of topics in this discussion, and the first one, perhaps inevitably, is the question of coping with lockdown and writing during lockdown in this extraordinary set of circumstances. And I wonder, Kate, how you found that.
Oh, I found it really difficult. I mean, you definitely need to be on your own to actually write, but at the same time, you need everyday life going on around you, and you need to get out. And I love to meet readers and go to conferences and things. And when I come back from them, I'm sort of buzzing with ideas, and I've really missed that. I've found it a struggle. It's a bit like wading through treacle, but I have just finished a manuscript and sent it off. But it has been difficult, definitely.
And what is the latest manuscript?
Oh, that's a new Wesley Peterson one called The Butterfly Cage.
Lovely.
So I'm waiting for my editor's verdict on that.
Lovely. Oh, well, fingers crossed. Andrew, how are you coping?
Well, not very well. I'm with Kate on this, really. I hadn't realised I was such a social animal until we had lockdown. or rather, not. I quite like my own company, as most writers do, but I also need people meeting people. It sort of feeds something within us. And I think too, as a writer, I'm trying to write the 5th Marwood and Lovett novel, which is called The Royal Secret. And I found it very difficult to focus. And I think that's because there's a sort of low-level anxiety about lockdown life. It's a bit like being in an airport departure lounge. You know what it's like. You're waiting for your flight to come up, and you're looking at your watch. Is it going to be late? Have I missed the announcement? I can't hear the PA properly. There's that constant sort of watchfulness, and that really gets in the way of the sort of focused concentration we as writers need. And the other thing is that, on a practical point of view, I had a book. My last novel out was The Last Protector, which came out on April the 2nd. We had a whole list of promotional events set up for it. All those went. It had a huge impact on the book. So on the whole, even though I'm finding I am able to concentrate a lot more now, thank heavens, lockdown has not been fun. Sorry, I'm having a bit of a whinge.
I don't blame you, Andrew.
Thank you, Kate.
What about you, Dee?
Yeah, well, personally, like Andrew, really, I've discovered what a sociable creature I am. I like going out and about. I've really missed the festivals. I've really missed meeting up with all my older friends, and the stimulation that comes from that, and the pleasure. It makes the hard work that comes in between quite okay. I can deal with it, but it's just been hard work and not that much of the pleasure, and I found that quite. But having said that, the CWA has kept very busy, and we've kept trying to support our authors. And given that they've not been able to attend launch events and so on, like Andrew was saying, or festivals, we have tried to do our little bit. And we offered a video opportunity on National Crime Reading Month Week. We set up a YouTube account, and we invited authors to send in videos of themselves. We called it Crime Writers in Residence, and we're hoping to extend that as well with another initiative on video. And we've also invited people to send blogs and short stories even, and we've done what we could, to try and alleviate that problem for people, so that they're still getting exposure for their books as much as we can help with.
Yes, those Crime Writers in Residence videos, very interesting. It gives you fresh insight. I think it's a really good initiative.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yes, I did. You did one, didn't you, Kate?
Yes, I did, yes. My gracious shed.
You're not in your shed now, though, are you?
No.
Very posh shed, if I say. Martin, what about you? I mean, how have you found lockdown?
Well, on one level, I feel your pain, because I too had a book published on the 2nd of April, which is Main Hall. So exactly
we must have a club.
Yes, exactly the same day as yours, and exactly the same problems. So no book launch, no events, no nothing really, apart from all these video and online activities that have kind of taken the place. So you miss the direct interaction, but I've been involved in quite a few of these Zoom panels, discussions of various kinds, Facebook Live and so on. And once I started to get my head around the technology and not worry too much about things crashing, which they sometimes do, I've found those enjoyable and interesting. But in terms of the writing, my experience has been different from yours and Kate's, and I think that it's interesting to wonder why. I've written more during lockdown than ever before,
Wow.
and there's no question about that, and I've enjoyed it. And I think the difference is that I've never been a full-time writer, full-time novelist before. And it's something I dreamed of doing as a small boy. I've never quite got round to it, because I've been pursuing another career alongside as a lawyer. I'm still a part-time consultant, but of course there's not much legal work going on nowadays. So I've had the chance to concentrate on the writing in a way that I've never been able to do before. And that has been exciting. I've really embraced it, and I've written a Lake District novel, back to my Lake District series. I've written it from start to finish faster than any other book I've written before, and I've enjoyed it. It's been a good experience. So for me, the ability to focus and concentrate without all the other things getting in the way so much. Of course, some of those things, as you rightly say, are very pleasurable, and misses those. But at least I've been able to catch up with deadlines and things like that, and that's been very good for my morale. So my experience has been very positive, really. And I have to say that although it's such a terrible time for so many people, for me personally, there've been a lot of positives during the last few months.
We always knew you had superpowers, Martin.
Oh, yes.
Well, sorry, go on, Kate.
I find I just miss people, miss being with people. Yeah, as Andrew said, I didn't realise I was such a sociable animal.
Yes, of course, the two of you have been full-time writers really for a pretty long time, haven't you? And that's the difference. I never have. It's something I've yearned for, but it's always felt as though I was travelling hopefully rather than arriving at it, as I say, the other things had got in the way. So that liberation from those other commitments, work commitments, has been a fresh experience. This sort of sense of excitement continues right now. I'm still writing avidly. I think I've had one day during the lockdown when I've not written, and that's I've never had that before.
Wow.
Impressive.
Yeah, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. So at least the publishers aren't going to be on my back quite so much over the deadlines, which is something.
I find that it's helped, Martin, being able to really go at a book, and so that does it help with the flow? Does it help with the style that you're writing in? Because when I write, I'm finding that I'm always writing in bits and pieces, in patches, 10 minutes here, half an hour there. And so when it's all finally finished, it's all a bit of a hodgepodge. It strikes me that if you can really dedicate day after day after day, then the continuity is going to be fabulous, isn't it? Are you pleased?
Yes. Yes, I think that is true, the continuity, but it's continuity on a daily basis rather than an hourly basis. So I have, as I think nearly all writers do, my myriad displacement activities. So I will concentrate for half an hour, say, and then go off and make myself a cup of coffee, something like that. But of course, if you're not traveling off to a meeting or an event or something, or into the office, then you do save a lot of time. So even if you're taking plenty of breaks, which I always do, and I've tried to get out in the locality for the mandatory daily walk, statutory daily walk, and all that sort of thing during the peak of lockdown, and that's been beneficial, trying to keep reasonably fit, and I think it's all fed into this sense of excitement and being able to focus without too many distractions. It's the distractions that I've always found, because my entire writing life has been a process of trying to fit the writing in around other projects.
Interesting.
I mean, how long have you been full time, Andrew?
Since 1981. I when I had my first contract, I thought, I'm okay, that's it. I'm a professional writer. I really was such a fool, and so I gave up my safe job as a librarian with a pension and paid holidays and all that sort of thing, and became a freelance.
Yeah.
I think it was easier in those days, but yeah, it was. Do you know, this is a bit of a diversion. I'd never heard of the Crime Writers Association when I started, until I began. No, until I published my first crime novel. It's I think one thing the CWA has done really well lately is it's sort of raised its profile sort of nationally so much better than it used to. That's one big difference. But anyway, I'm in danger of wandering off topic, so do haul me back, Martin.
No, I think that's a very pertinent point. And of course, your first novel, you're too modest to say so, but it did actually win the award, didn't it, for the best first novel?
Well, yeah, Caroline Minuscule. I was very lucky with that. But that was the first time I actually heard of the Crime Writers Association, because the secretary then, Marion Babson, as was, rang me up out of the blue, and she said, I'm the secretary of the Crime Writers Association. I said, what? And he said, you've actually won a prize And that was the first I heard of it. So ever since then, I've associated the Crime Writers Association with generosity, beneficence, wisdom.
Unexpected good news, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, things are very different then. The idea of being rung up to be told you'd won a prize is...
Yeah. It's great, isn't it? Yeah.
No long lists and short lists in those days. Yeah.
No.
But I just... Oh, sorry, no, it's okay. But the shortlist will have come out, I think, by the time this is broadcast for the daggers on the 6th of August.
Okay.
So no doubt people will have paid attention. I believe you're long listed, Andrew?
Yes, yeah, twice actually, I'm glad to say. But I mean, you know, long lists are long, aren't they, by definition? So my hopes are not too high.
Even so, considering how many books are nominated for the daggers, it's a huge achievement just getting on the long list. So.
Well, it's great. Yeah, it's lovely. Yeah.
Yeah, well, the daggers have done so much for such a long time. I mean, they go back a long way. It was in the very early years of the CWA that the daggers were inaugurated, except that it was the gold dagger, but in those days it was called the Crossed Red Herring Award. And it became the gold dagger in 1960.
Mm. And it was a familiar name, wasn't it? Who won the first one, Martin?
The very first was won by Winston Graham, who's better known as the creator of Poldark.
Poldark, yeah.
Yeah, but he also wrote a lot of crime novels, thrillers. The book that won the prize was called The Little Walls. It's a suspense story set on the Isle of Capri. But he wrote some fine books, including Marnie, which was filmed with Sean Connery and Tippi Hedren. A very memorable film. So he was, before Poldark really took off, he was probably more of a crime writer than a historical romance writer, saga writer.
He wrote a book called The Walking Stick, didn't he? Which
did,
was
yeah.
Was about a blind man or something. I remember reading that when I was about 12 and thinking, wow, this is one of the best novels I've ever read. He's a very good writer. Underrated now.
And that one was filmed as well, I think.
Was it?
Yeah, I think maybe David Hemmings was in that.
Okay.
Yeah, good writer, really good writer.
We live and learn, don't we?
Yeah. So the daggers have been an important part of the crime writing scene for over 60 years, and of course there are more daggers now, more categories than there used to be, but they not only still have a high profile, they probably have a higher profile than ever before, because of course you do have the announcements in advance, so people do know that they're in contention for these things in the way that Andrew and I didn't in our early days.
Yeah, I'm afraid we don't ring people up anymore. It's a shame, actually, isn't it? I think it's quite
I think you should send a telegram, Dee.
But yes, it's interesting, isn't it, how books that came out, many decades ago even, have still got resonance for us today. That the old stories, as it were, still attracts a lot of attention, as indeed is the case with this anthology.
That's right. Well, it's long been a passion of mine, and the trying to revive some of these older novels and the short stories, as in Vintage Crime. And it always used to strike me that it was a great pity that once a book went out of print, as all but the bestsellers used to do, that was usually it. The book vanished, and then it vanished from library shelves, and it was never seen again. And of course, that was the fate of 99% of novels, and 99% of crime novels, really. Not Agatha Christie, of course, not Dorothy L. Sayers, but there weren't many exceptions to the rule. And I think the great thing now is that we're seeing, thanks to digital publishing and a general revival of interest in these older stories, we're seeing these books being made available again after a very long time, sometimes 75 years, 80 years, and a whole new generation of readers are discovering them and thinking, well, actually, these are very good stories, and they're also a very eclectic mix. There's they don't just follow conventional patterns. So
I mean, one thing you've done, Martin, is as you've been, I think you've really spearheaded this movement in many ways of bringing back our attention to the old, half-forgotten classics of crime fiction, particularly the British ones. But you've reminded us of how extraordinarily varied it was. You know, we have this cliche in our heads about the cozy, don't we? The golden age murder, Miss Marple, the village green, the corpse of the curate. Whereas, as you've shown us, Martin, it's just so much more varied than that.
Absolutely.
Sorry, Kate?
It's quite surprising that not all of them are cozy. They deal with issues that are quite, we would think are quite contemporary.
Sinister themes, yes.
That's right, and that was true going way back to the 1930s. It's certainly true with the books in the post-war period. One of the books that the British Library has republished recently, The Spoilt Kill by Mary Kelly, won the Gold Dagger in 1961-62, and is a very fine book, but has been really forgotten. Mary Kelly was a terrific writer, and it's wonderful to me that this very talented but now pretty obscure writer, because she stopped writing novels in 1974, although she lived until 2017. She just gave up writing fiction. She's now being rediscovered, and she's doing very well. And this very morning, I had an email from her widower, Dennis, who's now in his 90s, and is absolutely thrilled to see his wife's books back on the shelves. And as he pointed out to me, the royalties now are rather better than they were in the late 1950s when she started out. So he's very happy.
Yeah,
that's
good.
That's very gratifying. Why do you think it is, Kate, that these older stories still resonate with us today?
I think people like a good mystery, and I don't think that's ever changed. And a good story. I think those writers then had the talent to, present a good, solid mystery and a good story, just as we do today. In fact, probably, the stories get repeated, don't they? It's just that the knack is just to keep them fresh, and present them in a new way.
I'm not sure I totally agree. I find it really interesting, the characters in crime stories. And all characters are different. I mean, okay, so they can fit into a certain sort of genre, if you like, or stereotype. But overall, I think it's the characters that make stories for me personally as a reader. I'm just listening to Agatha Christie's Appointment with Death. Actually, it's the first time I've heard it, or a long time since I read it, and it's fascinating for the characters and for the psychology. So the style of telling it is rather different than I used to from a contemporary crime novel, but it's just as fascinating. I'm totally absorbed. I can barely put it down, which is terrific, isn't it, for something that was...
People used to accuse Agatha Christie of having cardboard characters. It's got characters which doesn't.
No.
They're very very deep.
And she really explores the psychology as well. She's obviously really into that.
Yeah,
I find it engrossing.
Yes, some of the motives. I like them, the motives.
She was a very shrewd observer of human nature with a very cold and beady eye. Nothing cozy about her at all, really.
I very much agree with that, Andrew. I think it's this universality that I think helps to explain why she's got this continuing global appeal. That although the characters may not be portrayed in Dostoevskian depth, you can still recognize the types, and then she subverts your expectations, because it turns out that the detective is the killer, or the small child is the killer, or the pillar of the establishment is the killer, the least likely person. So she leads you in one direction, and then she pulls the rug from under your feet, and there's that very satisfying puzzle element, but there's also the recognition of the common aspects of humanity that bind us together wherever we are in the world. And that's one of the things that fascinates me. I was lucky enough last autumn, in the days when we could travel, to be invited to Shanghai to a festival of detective fiction, mysteries, and I was astonished by the level of interest among young Chinese people, exclusively under the age of 35, but thousands of them came to this festival, and they're fascinated by locked room puzzles, by Christie, by my modern day writers. Anthony Horowitz is a big seller there. So this universality that you see in Agatha Christie's works and some of the others is something that's very compelling and very influential, and it has an influence all over the place.
I've enjoyed reading some of the stories in Vintage Crime. The John Dixon car footprint.
Yes.
Really terrific, such fun.
Yes. Yeah.
As well. That's great.
Yes. Well, John Dixon Carr, although he's American, was a member of the CWA. That's why the story is there. I should say that Vintage Crime is a book that spans the period from the early 1950s to the 21st century, and the idea of it essentially is to take stories from CWA anthologies of the past and show through those stories the way that the crime genre has evolved in some ways, as well as providing a very entertaining and diverse mix of pieces of short fiction. And you mentioned the footprint in the sky, the John Dixon Carr story. That was in the anthology in 1968. And that actually, my experience was very different from Andrew's. Andrew's has described how he came across the CWA when he won the John Creasy dagger. That was the first he knew of it. But as a small boy who was rather obsessed with detective fiction, I saw in the bookshop in Manchester this anthology. And I persuaded my mother that it would be a good Christmas present. So I had a CWA anthology as a Christmas present, and that John Dixon Carr story was one of the stories in it. So it's been a particular pleasure to me to revive it in Vintage Crime.
Unlike Andrew, I discovered I knew about the CWA because my mum was a huge crime fiction fan, and I'd read See Little Roundels, winner of the CWA dagger, so I knew about it. And as soon as I got my contract, I contacted the CWA, can I join? And I got a lovely letter back from the then secretary, Judith Cutler, saying, no, not until your book is actually out.
Oh, that's very unkind, isn't it?
We have provisional memberships now, I'm pleased to say.
Yes.
Your contract, then you become a member, and it's converted to a full member once the book is out. But you are a member once you've got your contract.
Yeah. So you had to have your book in your hot little hand.
Well, as Dee says, that's one of the ways the CWA has evolved over the years, that it's become more and more flexible in its approach. I think that's a very good thing, and as a result, the membership's been growing for years and years, hasn't it, Dee?
It certainly has. Yeah, it's at a peak now, so that's great. We hope it continues, but it's grown particularly in the last, I'd say 3 or 4 years. It really seems to have put on a spurt, but of course that's reflected by the importance of crime as a genre now. I mean, the biggest selling genre, isn't it? People want to read crime.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, the CWA for me has always been a very welcoming community. You and I, Andrew, I think first met through CWA conferences.
You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Longer ago than either of us cared to remember, a very long time ago. And I have a vivid memory of my first CWA meeting of the Northern Chapter. when I went along to this lunch. I think there were 13 people. I went with my future wife. We were engaged at the time, and I was very nervous. I met there Reginald Hill, creator of the D.L. and Pascoe books, Robert Barnard, Light Reg, a Diamond Dagger winner, Peter Walker, the man who went on to be the inspiration for the Heartbeat TV series. And they were very welcoming and kind. They all became very, very good friends, and very supportive of me as a beginner. And that's something I'll never forget. That sense of friendship and community and welcome. It's a very important facet of the CWA, I think.
Yes, I remember when I first joined. I met Bob Bernard and Peter Walker, and they were so lovely, and everyone was so supportive, and it really felt as if I was coming home, really. And to this day, I love lunches and conferences.
I think it's a bit of an irony, really, isn't it? That you'd think crime writers would be really nasty people and sort of sneering at other crime writers and wondering how much they've earned this year, or want to poke them with a dagger. But in fact, we are incredibly sociable by and large, I think. And my experience was the same. The first CWA events I went to, everyone was just so welcoming. There was a sense of sort of gathering you into a community. This wonderful shared interest we all have, which in a way is why we're all here today, the four of us, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes. And the CWA has done a lot for writers, as Dee has mentioned, both established and newcomers. And that's an extremely valuable thing. And of course, particularly in very recent times with the lockdown, the pandemic, you've made the point yourselves that it's a stressful time for writers. So that sense of support, even if it's not there in the sense of physical face-to-face social events, it's still very valuable.
Yeah, we've really tried to build on that, obviously. I mean, lots of people tell us that they love the conference, or they love their chapter meetings, or they love the social side to the CWA. If they don't get to the social side, then they like getting the red herrings, and they also like reading things like the CRA newsletter that we send out. And we have tried to broaden the appeal, I suppose, of the CWA. I mean, for a lot of people now, social media is how they get that networking fix, if you like, as much as face-to-face. And obviously, in times of lockdown, that's been particularly important. And we've revamped all the social media platforms that we operate from recently. We've got 2 Twitter accounts, we've got several Facebook accounts, and we've got YouTube as well, where we put on the videos, as I mentioned earlier. And we also try to do more with online communications, mainly through the Crime Readers Association, which is the sister company, which we use to reach out to readers. And we've got quite a large database of readers who pick up the CRA newsletter and pick up case files, as well as go onto the CRA website. And obviously that's used as a platform for our members. So writers can put things about their books, about themselves, into these communications, and the CWA supports them in that way.
Yeah, it's nice to bring readers into it, I think. I often think that my mother would have loved the Crime Readers Association.
Mine would too.
And where would we be without readers?
Absolutely. And those publications you mentioned, the CRA newsletter and the case files, which comes out every other month. The newsletter comes out every month, doesn't it? Those are things that are free. Anyone watching this video could sign up and start to receive them.
Yeah, all they've got to do is hop along to the CRA website, which is thecra.co.uk, and there's a join up panel next to the blog page, I believe it is, so you can go along there and have a look and see what you'll be getting. And we put archived copies of the newsletter on there as well, so you can have a little read and check that it's the kind of thing you're looking for. We were talking before, weren't we, about maybe appealing to people when they're just starting out, as well as more established members. And I know that, Andrew, you had quite a lot to do with perhaps a major initiative in that direction, the debut dagger.
Yeah, it was, I don't know, one of those ideas, you know, oops, I'm using my headphones in my excitement. It's one of those ideas that every now and then everyone has, that it suddenly seems to have everything going for it. It has struck, I was on the CWA committee then, is it called the board now? And we were trying to think of ways to raise the profile of crime writing. At the time, I was doing a lot of reading for publishers, and I knew just how hard some publishers' editors were finding it to find good new crime fiction. And also, as a writer, I could remember just how hard it was for me when I was starting out. You know, knowing where to send stuff, how to get that first toe in the door, let alone the first foot. Mm. And then I thought, is there a way to bring all this together, the CWA, the aspiring crime writers, and the publishers? And then I thought, why not a competition? And this was the origin of the debut dagger. I suppose it's a little over 20 years ago now.
That's right, yeah.
And the idea was we'd ask for people to send in the first chapter of a crime novel with a brief outline of how they thought it could move on from there. Not very long, a few thousand words. And we had a real stroke of luck. In those days, Adrian Muller, who's the founder of Crime Fest, I know we all know him, he knew somebody at the Times newspapers who got, and he interested this marketing person, in the idea, which meant we had all this free advertising for the first 2 years. And I have to say, it worked beyond our wildest dreams. The first year we had 500 applicants, from which we drew a short list of 10 with one winner. But next year we got 800 applicants. Now, all this flood of entries, obviously not everyone could make the short list, only 10 in my time. I don't know what it is now, but the great joy for them was that their work was seen by editors, publishers, by agents, and by other crime writers. And it was a huge validation for them. And many of them, you know, we could all name names, have gone through that process and have become published crime writers, in some cases bestsellers as well. So it really was one of those ideas that has worked, and I'm so delighted that it's carried on over the years. It's really got legs, and I know even as I'm talking now, there are crime writers out here who may be watching some of this, who haven't quite made it. Maybe they've not actually quite written the first chapter yet, even, but they think they're crime writers. They've got an idea. They've got a desire to do it. You should do it. You should do it now. You should start today, and you should enter the CWA debut dagger competition.
Absolutely, I've got to endorse every word of that. The next year's competition opens on the 1st of October this year, and you can find details about that on the CWA website, and that's the cwa.co.uk. This year we've got a long list of 12 and a short list of 6, I think it is. And yes, we still do exactly what you describe, Andrew, and we still send out the short list or even the long list if it's requested to agents and publishers in the UK. And almost every year, somebody on the short list, if not the winner, picks up a contract. And to mention names, Mike Craven, who some of you will know, he was shortlisted. He didn't win. He was shortlisted for the debut dagger a few years back now. And that really gave his career a huge push. Just as you say, you know, he'd been sort of around the edges and not quite got there. And that got the interest that he needed. And he started, you know, he got his book published and he started having quite a good career. And he went from one publisher to another. And he actually won the Gold Dagger last year with the puppet show. which is phenomenal. So what a success story that is.
Absolutely right. That's, I mean, Mike's a very good example, excellent example, and there are others. And it might also be worth perhaps you're saying a little bit about short stories, and since we're talking about a short story collection, Vintage Crime, because the CWA runs competition for short stories, doesn't it?
That's right. It's the Marjorie Allingham Short Mystery Prize. The judges were very keen to keep it in the mystery genre rather than it to become a thriller or anything like that. So it's known as the Short Mystery Prize these days, and we get hundreds of entries for that too every year. And again, that's open on the 1st of October. The deadline for both that and the debut dagger is the end of February next year. And that's for a short story up to 3,500 words. And we ask that people try to follow Marjorie Allingham's definition for a mystery, which is very interesting. I can't quite recall it just now, but that's on the website. If you go
box shaped.
Yeah, the box
shaped, isn't it? Yeah. Martin, you'll
everyone. That's open to both published and unpublished writers.
There's a deadly hush in the close tonight.
Andrew, you're about to say something.
No, I was only saying you'd know this quote, wouldn't you? The Marjorie Allingham one off by heart.
It is that the mystery is box shaped, and then she describes the box in a little more detail. I can't get it precisely without checking, but it's a curious definition. Whether one agrees with it or not is a slightly different matter. But of course, Marjorie is one of those exceptional writers. I was mentioning before, like Christie and Dorothy L. Sayers, who has remained in print through the years, and there is a Marjorie Allingham Society which works in conjunction with the CWA to sponsor and support and run and judge this competition. And again, it's something that's open to unpublished writers as well as published writers. So it's if you don't feel you're quite ready to take on the novel with the debut dagger, then maybe this is an alternative way to dip your toe in criminal waters.
Yes, we try to put up on the website, and we try to give hints and tips as well, especially as we run up to the deadlines for both competitions, both the Marjorie Allingham and the debut dagger. We try to put tips up on the website, and we also have a database of people who register their interest, and we send out information to them too, hints about how to write a synopsis, which you've got to do these days for the debut dagger, or best approach to winning competitions, and that kind of thing. And we also have a Facebook group, of course, called The Debuts, that quite a lot of people join. And it's not just a case of getting advice or encouragement from the CWA, which of course they do, but it's also they get support from other writers. And I find that really quite interesting. It goes back to what we were saying before about crime writers being such nice people. Everyone does offer that sort of support when it is a competition, when all's said and done, and yet people are very encouraging, and that's great to see. So that's the debuts, which people apply to join, and it gives them a lot of support, I think, which is what we're wanting to do. We're also looking at a couple of other initiatives. We can't publicise them yet because they're yet to be finalised, but things that will help people who definitely want to become crime writers, but again haven't got as far as getting that contract yet, and perhaps haven't even finished a novel. But we're looking at ways that we can let them know about the CWA, and let them know what we can do for them, and maybe interest them in joining us at an earlier stage.
Yes, it's a very valuable set of initiatives, that, and certainly in my own case, although this was long before the days of Marjorie Allingham competition, my first ever success with a crime story was with a short story that I entered for a competition, and it happened to win that competition, and it got published in a magazine. And Robert Barnard, who we mentioned earlier, got in touch with Ellery Queen's mystery magazine in the United States and suggested they take it as well. So that was an example of how a very successful established writer was very helpful and supportive to a raw beginner. And it's also an example of starting out with a short story. Although I was at the time writing a novel, it was a very exciting breakthrough. It felt like a breakthrough moment, and in some ways it really was.
Yes, I love writing short stories. It's almost like a palate cleanser between. I write quite a long running series, and when I've finished a book, I always write a couple of short stories just to sort of give myself a change.
Really? Yeah.
I really enjoy, and you can set them at any time or write in first person, third person, future, past, anything really.
I think one of the nice things about the short story as a medium, particularly perhaps the crime short story, is that it lets us experiment. If you're writing a novel, you particularly if it's a series, it's a huge undertaking. It takes a long time, and you're working within a particular framework, particularly, as I say, if it's a series. But with a short story, you've got the liberty to experiment.
Yeah.
And that's why it really feels like play, doesn't it? You've got this all these toys in the playpen, and you can pick them all up and fiddle them and try out each one in turn.
And sometimes you can get an idea for a full-length book from a short story. I certainly did for my Albert Lincoln trilogy. It all stemmed from a short story I wrote, which was...
That's your 1920s.
Yeah.
World War I.
Yeah, post World War I. Yeah.
Yes. With my most recent series, the one set in the 1930s, I had the idea for a novel, and it began with a character, one Rachel Savenet, mysterious woman who arrives in London with a puzzling agenda connected with murder, and because this was very much a departure for me to write a historical book and to write a more character-based story, I decided that what I'd do is write a short story about the character just to see whether I liked writing about her. And so that's what I did. I didn't try to get the short story published. That wasn't the nature of the exercise, but it was about thinking my way into the mindset of the character. And it was a very valuable experience for me right at the start of that process of writing what is now becoming a series. But as I say, the short story itself, I never tried to get it published, but it was invaluable as a means of exploring the motivation of the character.
Of course, you won the inaugural Marjorie Allingham Prize, I believe, Martin, didn't you, with acknowledgements? So when you do submit a story, it tends to do well.
Well, I've had some luck with short stories over the years, and acknowledgements was as Andrew says, the great thing is you can experiment. So I once wrote a story, a short crime story, which was an extract from an index to a book. Very short, but that was the idea of it. It's a murder mystery in itself. And acknowledgements was an idea that came to me when I was reading one of these books, which has pages and pages and pages of acknowledgements from the author, all very worthy and necessary. But sometimes, if you look at them, you feel, do I really want to read through all this? So I decided to write a jokey story, but one with a sinister edge, which begins as a typical set of acknowledgements at the end of a book from a not particularly successful author, and then it turns into something rather dark and criminal.
Excellent. I think we were talking to, we were going to talk a little bit about stories from the past that resonate. I think that was a topic that we had in mind, and I wondered, Kate, what you have to say about that, because obviously you're Wesley Peterson series.
Yes, I've written 24 books in the Wesley Peterson series, and I first got the idea for the first one, The Merchant's House, when I came across a story that had the same importance in the past as the present. So I said, I love historical crime, And I wanted to write historical crime, but I also wanted to write about modern day society. So I thought, what shall I do? And I thought, why don't I combine both? So I did a modern day police procedural starring my D.I. Wesley Peterson, with a historical story and a parallel historical story in the background. I'm quite also interested in archaeology, so I introduced the story through archaeology and the findings. And the two stories intertwined and reflected each other, and you know, one solution to one led to the solution to the other. So I've used that technique in all my Wesley Peterson stories. You always get two mysteries for the price of one historical and one day.
As a reader, I must admit, I find that absolutely fascinating, and I really enjoy reading your books because.
Oh, thank you.
But I also like reading historical set in another century, and I think there's always something to be found in them that resonates anyway. I mean, Andrew, obviously your stories that are set in 17th century England, they're absolutely fascinating to me. I'm just reading The King's Evil at the moment. And I think one of the things that I love, and it's a very tiny little thing, but I love the way that you've researched it, and that research comes out, and I find that just as fascinating now, you know, reading it as a contemporary person. But like the thing about where the word Piccadilly came from,
right.
in London, and that's absolutely fascinating, and that's, you know, part of the charm of historical novels for me, as well as the sort of wider story that we see resonating, if you like.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things I like about historical fiction is that you're not only getting a story, and in my case, I hope a crime story, but also as I'm writing it, I'm climbing into another world. And it's a world with many parallels to ours, many parallels, and human nature doesn't change that much, but it does have a very different mindset. And you know, I'm in the 17th century where things, they thought about women very differently then, and God, and witches, and slavery, all these things. That it's a completely different mindset, and I really like trying to imagine myself from the inside into what that mindset was. But as I say, human nature itself tends to be pretty much the same. I mean, you get the same mechanisms of desire, of power struggles, the same needs, hunger, shelter, and it's a matter of weaving those in as well. Yeah, I've written, I think, in the 17th century, in the 18th century, the 19th century, and of course the early 20th century as well. And every period has its own charm. So it's an uproar, but always, of course, it's they're the same human beings in it, and always in real emotional terms, there are the same crimes, the same people who are trying to create victims of other people in one way or another. That doesn't change.
And when you're doing research, you find out all sorts of strange things. Like I was walking down the street in Dartmouth where my books are set, and I saw this plaque, The Calculating Boy, and I did a bit of research on this. It was a boy called George Parker Bidder, and his father, this boy was, you know, brilliant at doing calculations in his head. His father used to hawk him round inns and fairs and generally, you know, exploit him. And I thought it's just like these, you know, child prodigies with the pushy parents, you know, so I made that the parallel. You come across some fascinating things when you're doing research.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess what we see with historical novels is the same themes very often, isn't it? But they're packaged in a different way.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. Yeah, they are packaged in a different way, but they are the same themes, and it's yeah, it's interesting. I mean, they reckon now that something like 10 or 15% of all crime fiction published in the UK is set in the past. So it's a pretty solid minority interest there.
It is. That's a pretty high figure, really, when you think about it, isn't it? And really, pre-1970, there weren't many historical crime novels. So it's something that's developed over the last 50 years.
Yeah.
Although I think, Andrew, you must have covered more different periods than almost anybody as a novelist.
Yeah, I got a bit carried away, really, didn't I?
Well, I must put a word in for it's one of my great all-time favourites, the Roth trilogy, reverse chronology, where you write these 3 books which go back in time, and each one is a different type of novel. It's an absolutely fascinating, breathtaking piece of work. Anyone who hasn't read it should do.
Oh, please do.
I agree.
But I think, I mean, this, I'm very kind of you to say that, Martin, actually. I'm touched. But it does illustrate the point that crime fiction is such a varied genre. You can play around with the structure. You can play around with the way you tell a story. You can do so many things with it. And I would say you can do as much in crime fiction as you can in so-called literary fiction. It's the only difference between the two really is that we crime writers have to remember our readers want to be entertained. They want to be somehow persuaded to turn the pages.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I like to think that one of the elements of vintage crime is that readers will see how a galaxy of writers from the 1950s onwards have tackled the issue of crime in a whole variety of different ways. So we have great names from the past like Michael Gilbert and Julian Simmons, the Scottish police writer Bill Knox, coming right up to the present day, not just Andrew and Kate, but also the likes of Mick Herron. So you see the crime genre developing, but as you say, Andrew, there are these constants of human nature that are explored in the stories, but packaged in all kinds of different ways.
And the one thing they have in common is this readability, and the stories in vintage crime show that. I think it's old though some of them may be, they are still there to entertain you. They're still there to be read.
Yeah,
I think the duty of a writer is to keep the reader turning the pages.
Exactly.
Next.
That's Article 1 of our creed, I think.
Exactly.
Your story, though, in vintage crime is quite modern, Martin, isn't it? Quite contemporary. Just at the moment, in particular, it's got a certain resonance.
Yes, that's Melusine. That was a story that I wrote at the time of the foot and mouth outbreak in the early days of the century. Seems a lifetime ago now, but that was one of the first short stories I'd written, if not the first, with a rural background. And that was quite significant. It goes back to the point we were making before about the chance you have with short stories to experiment. And having written that story, a few weeks later, I was talking to an editor who'd just taken a book of mine that was a standalone. And the editor said to me, I'd like to publish a new series from you, but I'd like it to have a rural background. And if I hadn't had the confidence and experience of writing that short story, Melusine, then I'm not sure that I would have tried to rise to the challenge. But as it turned out, I came up with the idea of writing books set in the Lake District, contemporary books, and the publisher liked the idea and commissioned the first one, The Coffin Trail, and that did pretty well. So it really was a bit of a breakthrough moment. But without the short story in the background, it may not happen.
Short stories may be short, but that does not mean they're lightweight. They they can have a lot of heft one way and another, can't they?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, in the first anthology I edited for the CWA, one of the contributors was the young Ian Rankin, and that story of his won the short story Dagger, and then immediately after that, his next novel won the Gold Dagger, and he was away. So it was. I like to think it was a bit of a turning point in that brilliant career. So short stories can have all sorts of unexpected consequences and a very long lifespan as well. And I do think that the stories, the older stories in this anthology have interest in themselves as entertainment, but also there's a little touch of social history as well, which is
isn't there just? Yeah. I think crime fiction records without trying to social history. It does it so well because it's not trying to do it, doesn't it? But if you read a crime novel from the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, even the 1990s, you can see so much of what life was like then, what people thought, their obsessions, attitudes. Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it?
It is very true.
I mean, if I can go back to short stories for a moment, one thing I've really enjoyed about the short stories I've done is that it's also allowed me. I have a series, my Lidmouth series, as some of you know, set in the 1950s, which is a crime series that unfolds over real time in the 1950s. I mean, not now, but one thing I've been able to do with short stories is explore this world I've created. Lidmouth is a small market town in the Welsh borders, but with short stories, you can look at all these characters you were interested in, but never could work into the main novels. And so you can create a denser, a more densely populated, more solid overall world in a series, and that's something I think the short story is really offers you the opportunity to do.
That's exactly right. I've just finished work on a short story with one of the two protagonists from Gallows Court and Mortmain Hall. A character called Jacob Flint, a young journalist. He flies on his own in that story, but it was a way of taking that character just as you've described, exactly in that way, in the way that you've done it in Lidmouth, but taking him on an investigation of his own that doesn't involve Rachel this time. And I really enjoyed writing that.
How about Kate? Is there anything particular about your short stories? Because I mean, I know you've written quite a lot of short stories. Did you not have an anthology of your own published at one time?
Well, online, yes. Just a selection of the ones I've written. The one in this and Vintage Crime is called Top Deck, and comes from my memories of taking the 80 bus into town from the Liverpool suburbs, and somebody sees something from the top deck of the 80 bus, and there's a twist at the end. And, you know, it's the time of the Beatles, and
I was going to say it's set in the 60s, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great story.
It's very historical, but to others, it's you know, it didn't seem that long ago.
That's right.
And it was shortlisted for Dagger.
It was, yeah.
Oh wow, yeah.
Excellent.
You've won the short story Dagger, Martin, haven't you?
Yes, a story set in Venice called The Bookbinder's Apprentice, which was a very macabre little story, but on holiday in Venice, and looked into a shop window, a bookbinder's window, and a really rather chilling idea for a story occurred to me on holiday. So it was, that story was very lucky for me indeed. So.
We crime writers never rest, even on holiday.
Absolutely.
And that's what's so lovely about going away. You can get fresh ideas for short stories.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, we look forward to being able to do it again before too long.
Yeah.
But perhaps I'd better just finish then and say thank you to everybody coming along, and to remind people about Vintage Crime and the anthology we've been talking about, and got contributors here with Andrew, Kate and Martin. Martin's also edited the anthology. If you would like a chance to win a special Flame Tree Crime bundle, which sounds very exciting, it's a hardcover edition of Vintage Crime with a foiled Flame Tree notebook, and the detective crime thriller by Faye Snowden called The Killing Fire. All you need to do is to send an email to Maria at flametreepublishing.com. That's Flametree Publishing, all one word. And you'll get a chance to win this special bundle. It sounds very exciting. Otherwise, I can assure you that Vintage Crime is available from all your usual outlets, including the Flametree Publishing website, and also your independent bookshop, of course, and any other outlet where you usually go to buy books. So, thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dee.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.